All right, we're live, buddy.
Hey there, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, fine. How's life in California?
Living the dream, man. Living the
Yeah,
dream. Yeah,
yeah.
we're
It's
and having a
not
good time
not dreamy internet down there yet.
here in
Seems
my
to-
new. Oh, I hope so.
yeah,
I'm at
seems
our
solid
office.
today.
It's
Yeah,
fun. Hanging out in our new office space, and it's good. It's good. Yeah, we're having a good time. So,
excellent. Sounds
you ready
good.
for a good conversation today?
Absolutely, yeah. So today's conversation topic for anyone who's just tuning in: e-commerce sellers battle inflation with pricing power. That sounds like a sort of tabloid headline almost. I like it.
I know, right?
Yeah,
War on
yeah,
the internet.
yeah,
It is, man. It is like that, and it's getting serious out there for a lot of people. I mean, this is a
yeah.
serious concern, and we're all trying to figure out how best to manage. And so, in today's conversation, we'll have a good time looking at that. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, it's very important. I think my feeling about this, lots of interesting reports back from the front line, as it were, from the 10K Collective Mastermind and other
Hmm.
people I know in the UK, and I think it's just beginning, is my impression. So I think
Hmm.
this is the
Yeah.
whatever metaphor we want, thin end of the wedge. This is just the waves before the tsunami, etc., etc.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Hmm.
this is a great time to prepare. I think before it's all upon us, and we're running around like headless chickens. Well,
Yeah.
that's the temptation.
Yeah. Too right. Okay. Well, let's kick it off, man. If you're joining us live in the chats, feel free to say hello. Give us a like, love, comment. If you're watching on Facebook or in one of the groups, feel free to ask questions. We're going to dive into a lot of the content of this is coming out of our my pricing power book that I did several years ago and have refreshed recently. So that's a great book to pick up on Amazon. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as this gets published on the podcast in the future. So let's jump into it. I'm going to do an introduction for the podcast, and then we'll jump into the content. Michael, you ready to roll? Okay, great. We can hear you typing quite a bit, but there's just that. Here we go. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from May 2021 to May 2022, the Consumer Price Index for urban consumers increased 8.6%. That's the largest 12-month increase since December 1981, when I was 10 years old, and I am not a young man. And so it's just incredible how impactful the inflation, situation is touching our economy. This climate now that's created is the biggest threat to business owners, in my view, since I would assume the last 50 years. What it means is it used to be you versus your competitors, discovering how much pricing power there was in the market and what customers would pay for a product. Now it's you versus your competitors versus massive inflation. And it's like a third party has entered the war. And we have to understand what this means for us as e commerce sellers. In this conversation, we're going to dive into that. We're going to discuss how to look at the situation, how to respond, and what's going on generally, and how it impacts our e-commerce operations. So, Michael, you ready to dive into this important topic?
Absolutely, yeah. I would say what's interesting to me, just as a prelude to the direct topic, is the general context of e-commerce has been, I guess, in a period with the odd blip, but especially for third-party sellers on Amazon or those who've been selling on Shopify, any of these platforms didn't exist really. In a time of recession, I think. So this is for anyone in e-commerce directly, I think, an absolutely new experience. Whereas, of course, for anyone who's been around for a very long time, it's not a new experience, but it has been a long time since these kinds of things have been around, hasn't it? This very
Hmm. Hmm.
reminiscent of the 70s in the UK with protectionists
Hmm.
against Europe. There's a lot of strikes. People are asking for 7% pay rises, which is still below the inflation rate, and getting 3% and going on strikes. And this is very much the sort of return to the past and oil price shocks due to war, etc. So I think that this is not unprecedented. It is just simply
Oh,
not
you muted yourself,
not
buddy.
something that we've experienced in
There you
recent
go.
history. That's all. So you were saying that we're now sort of fighting on three fronts. So
Yeah.
what is the sort of outcome for the e-commerce operator?
Well, I think most operators, if they have cost of goods, that have rising amounts of, rising costs in their supply chain, they're going to lose a lot of profit. And so the profitable e-commerce operators will lose profit. The not profitable e-commerce operators will go from bad to worse. And so, if you've been trying to scale a business and you haven't really been focused on profit, maybe you've just been going after top line revenue, hoping to, get scale. Um, your margins are going to go from bad to worse in many situations, depending on the costs associated with your supply chain. For your cost of goods. Um, that means the weakest companies will go out of business, and many people will just capitulate. They'll just say, "I can't do this. I can't run my business in the red for this long, this badly." Um, Now, it also means a small percentage of savvy operators, in my view, will be creative in their pricing, will be creative in their supply chain structures, and will become opportunistic and will take leadership and maybe take new leadership roles in their category. And maybe new entrants will emerge that will be shiny, happy, and new, and priced wisely, and will succeed in this new climate. I would assume they'll do that on the basis of appeal to value, and they'll be creative in how they attract customers. But then the final piece there will be that old market leaders will fall off and new market leaders will emerge. Old market leaders might fall off just because they're asleep at the switch and they don't actively manage their pricing, and they don't understand how tenuous the situation is in terms of pricing, or maybe they feel like they can't manage their pricing. They're painted themselves into a corner, and they can't manage their pricing creatively, whereas new entrants can. And that'll be the basis upon which new entrants overtake the old guard. So this is going to be a turbulent time. I would say in general, most companies are going to be less profitable if they're dealing with physical goods. And that's just a reality of it, because inflation is eating away at their profit margin.
Yeah, some very good insights there. One of which I think is optimistic, and I think that's really important to bear in mind. So I think that, to your last point first, I think a lot of people who have been in the game for a while will have built up overhead almost, by accident. It sort of happens unless you cull, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
also it will have been overhead that was an appropriate overhead structure if they were reasonably profitable, well-run businesses for a situation in the world that I think is not going to exist in the future. So I'm in a sense very bearish on this, but I'm equally, as you say, bullish on the idea that savvy operators can scale. I think that one of the things to that point of the weakest companies going out of business, those are two sides of the same coin. I'm already way earlier than I was expecting, seeing deals starting to come across my desk, and certainly those of the mastermind, where people are just going out of business who are their competition.
Yeah.
Some of the mastermind members, sadly, a couple of them have actually almost basically gone out of business due to COVID. And then post-COVID, and sort of with inflation pressures on top, some of them are saying their competitors go out of business. And actually, one of them had a competitor reach directly out to them and say, "Would you like to buy, some of our assets?" And obviously, they're in a very strong position to negotiate, and it could be in a real expansion opportunity. It could, the brand exposure and brand assets that this company has are very, very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
But the back end was not well run. And to your point about the back end sort of cost structures were, I think, really pretty appalling. So good
This is
opportunities starting up.
Yeah, this goes back. What you just described goes back directly to our conversation about the STAR principle and the 80-20 rule from Richard Koch, which is uh, advantage accrues more advantage. And if you're a strong operator in this context, in this climate, and you have competitors that are weaker than you, they're going to get more weak. And if you can stay ahead of them, they might capitulate, and they might. I mean, that's amazing that happened already in your group. What this means is that if you're the strong and your competitors are the weaker, you might very well double. You might grow through acquisition, basically. You might end up getting the brands that you hated and that you fought against you might now own them, and then you
Yeah.
can't hate them so much.
Yeah,
Then you,
yeah. It's a very good
uh,
point because the mastermind member who's discussing this, which obviously the details of which are very confidential, but I
sure,
can say that it's happening in general,
yeah,
was saying that he's had a couple of the mastermind members have had some experience of taking over a business and
hmm
trying to integrate the staff. And one of the issues is exactly what you just said, that, your brand, Joe Blogg's brand, the Miles brand takes over the Veezy
hmm
brand. And then suddenly all the Miles people are like, Veezy, but they're rubbish
we
products. And like,
hate
we've been
you.
saying that we hate you. And suddenly they've got to make friends with it. And that can often
hmm
be very problematic,
Yeah,
gear change, mental switch. So that it's
yeah,
not without its challenges, but then everything got its challenges. As you say, the star principle absolutely applies. What I think is interesting though is the star principle traditionally, just to put a nuance on it, is about being part of a growing market and being the
hmm
market leader. What I think a lot of us
hmm
are going to have to make friends with is being part of overall, at least temporarily, shrinking markets and
hmm
gaining business growth by
right,
gaining market share, which either means buying out the competitor, which is complex, but
yeah.
ultimately, you're kind of taking the fight off the board, or fighting super hard for market share, which is going to be brutal. I think
Well,
it's
the
going to be
question is, how are you the market leader? If you're the market leader because you grew fast with a lot of debt, maybe you had some kind of investors or something like that, but you didn't have margin, then you're the market leader on on shaking ground. You're on sinking sand, to use the biblical Sunday morning metaphor. You built your house on sinking sand. No profit, no real financial solid foundation. Whereas if you're the cash cow, which Richard Koch doesn't advise people to be the cash cow and a leader, but that means you're the one who's really kind of just it's a slower growth situation, but you've really got a lot of profit coming in. Well, in a time like this, if there's a big recession coming and a lot of people are going to exit the market, you kind of want to be somewhere in the middle. You want to be the market leader, but not the market leader with flim flam. You want to be the market leader with real cash on the balance sheet and a strong financial position, because then, as the 80-20 rule dictates, advantage will accrue to those who have advantage. Those who
yeah.
have will have more, and those who don't will have even what they have taken away from them, to use the Matthew principle
Mm,
phrasing of it. And so I think that's what's going to be happening, and inflation will absolutely kick that in. And you're right to say that COVID, I suppose, was already a whack to
mm,
many businesses. I hadn't thought through that component of it, but the reality is that many good businesses were damaged tremendously by COVID.
yeah.
A few businesses were benefited by it. They came out of it stronger, and so that creates a whole turbulent situation that this whole new layer of craziness sits on top of.
The final thing I'd say about the COVID thing is two things. I mean, number one, like a lot of the time, all governments in the world, and probably quite rightly, incurred debt of all kinds, metaphorical and directly, just debt.
hmm
And so did
hmm
some of the businesses within them. So in other words, they paid for a lot of people to do nothing, probably quite rightly, maybe not, you can argue, but they did. And now they've got to pay that back. So governments will not be supporting people who've still got the post-COVID effects financially. That's the first thing.
Yeah,
Um, so that's leading, I think, to what I was kind of expecting to come earlier, is the sort of COVID effect on businesses, and a lot of businesses going out of business
yeah,
and selling their assets. That's
yeah,
now happening later than I was expecting.
yeah.
But the other thing is that we don't live in a post-COVID world in terms of supply chains. I mean, in America, in Europe, in the UK, everyone's wandering out without face masks. Nobody cares at all. A friend of mine's been living in California and says they're much stricter there. So it varies, but
hmm
it's kind of post-COVID. China is in the opposite. They're in the biggest lockdown ever in their
Yeah,
history, and they're good at lockdown. So we are not in a post-COVID world. So we're kind of getting hit from
right.
all sides, just quotes unquote from COVID, and then inflation comes on top. So no wonder it's challenging.
And
So
yeah,
sorry.
just I was just gonna say, just to speak to that, I just was listening to the All In podcast. I love that podcast, and those guys were just talking about this, and they quoted Jerome Powell, who has said, apparently the Fed chair, in essence, he's willing to destroy the economy to combat inflation. Or, I mean, those are the horns of the dilemma he's on. He to really really combat inflation, his lever, his pulley he can move is the interest rate. He raises that thing up and up and up and up, and the economy is just going to get worse and worse and worse. It's going to do monumental damage, and that's the dilemma he's in. I mean,
Mm,
there's only it's kind of binary like that. It's like inflation versus the interest rate.
Yeah.
And so what that means is there's going to be massive pain in the market, and that's just the reality of it. So anyway, yeah, it's a complex time,
Yeah.
but man, for business in e-commerce operators, people are still going to be buying toilet paper, and
Yeah.
they're still going to be buying, toilet bowl cleaner. And
Yeah.
I don't know why to focus on the toilets. They're still going to be buying toilets,
Yeah.
but this is going to be a lot of discretionary spending is going to go by the wayside, and
Yeah.
the basics will become more important than ever. But to the point of this podcast conversation, I think the question is, how does pricing play into all of this? And I think that's probably the thread we want to pull on today, just to go down that road a bit. So.
Absolutely. I mean, one final question on the sort of macroeconomic piece then, because it is, as you say, it is now suddenly a bigger, ever bigger part of our thinking, rather than just, oh, well, that's in the background, I can focus on what competitions are doing. So what do you think are the root causes of this? And I guess we've talked about some of this. Is it a universal truth you're describing, is perhaps a better question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the question is, is it universal? Is this situation going to impact all e-commerce sellers? I would say the e-commerce sellers that operate in the physical product space are most at risk, and inside that risk group, the e-commerce sellers that operate with what you might call discretionary product, lines, or products that are aspirational, maybe brands, that kind of stuff. It's not toilet paper and eggs and peanut butter and stuff like that. It's more like the luxury watches, or Mont Blanc pins, or things that people can say, nah, I really wanted that, but maybe I'll wait 5 years. It wasn't really a need to have, it was a want to have. I think operators in those types of spaces will be the most at risk. Operators that are, maybe in the retail arbitrage space, kind of entry level kitchen table entrepreneurs that are sourcing items that are, new in the box at a garage sale, and can buy for $1 and can resell for $17 or $39. I think those sellers will be fine. I think the private label sellers who have good margin, and are in a needed, product category, will be fine. I think digital goods sellers that are, um, in the right types of niches will be fine. I could explain more on the digital seller side. I know that's such a niche situation, but that's this one I live in the most. But some of those people would be fine. Others won't be. And so I think it's broadly applicable what's happening. I think the inflation hitting the economy obviously hits all consumers, and so is universal. And the pricing strategy, therefore, is an opportunity for all sellers, or a requirement for all sellers to think through. And so I think in that regard, the inflation versus your pricing strategy is a universal. The category you're in is sort of a secondary consideration, in terms of how aggressive you have to be to solve your specific problems.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So in other words, it does apply to everyone, but some people are in a much more defensible position than others, if I'm summarizing correctly.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
other thing I would say finally is this, that understandably, central bankers and governments tend to say things like, this problem is temporary, which is understandable because it becomes self-perpetuating, especially somebody at the Fed says something, the Fed chairman sneezes the wrong day and the entire world, stock market falls down a percentage point. So having said that, I think we should believe that. And I really think that there's an underestimation of how big the coming trends could be. Without going too deep into this, just a final thought on the macro stuff before we get into how to solve it.
Yeah.
According to Zion, there are a couple of things. Above all, demographics and America's withdrawal from the world militarily, which is a verifiable, statistical thing. Both of them, particular demographics, does mean that most countries will not have the people that provide capital are mostly going to retirement, and the baby boomer generation, and the people that consume and are the cheap producers in most countries, including especially China and most European countries, are going, are not being produced in many numbers because people stopped having kids a long time ago. America is probably the most proof against that. in the world generally. So I think there's going to be a very big division between what happens in America in 2-3 years time versus what happens in Europe and UK. And I think that one of the things I'm trying to encourage everyone to is just, if you're not already selling in the United States, it's not going to be a nice to have, it's going to be a must have. So for me, that's another who's vulnerable, who's not thing. I think if you're selling to Germans right now, that could get ugly, and it could do so within a matter of months, I think, in terms of consumer demand.
Well, we're framing this all as very, very negative stuff, which it is. But I think we've already started to pull through a couple responses or prescriptions. One prescription I'll just mention, and then I want to kind of go into what you just described. But one prescription I'll mention is the marketplace you sell on itself is a prescription to think through. What marketplace offers you the best margins? And that's certainly a consideration for every e-commerce seller. Can you make more money selling on XYZ marketplace than the other? That analysis is really super central right now because the profitability of it is most important. The question is, what marketplace provides you the most profitability? That's one thing. You just described another question, which is which geographic market provides you the most opportunity. So to your point, yeah, I think that's a second thread to pull on or a lever. Is what geography provides me with the most profitability opportunity. And if you're a European seller, then maybe the US is the answer. I think those two things by themselves are moving your chess pieces around the chessboard. It's not really a pricing strategy, it's a location strategy, which is very valid. And then there's pricing strategies that can be brought to bear. And so I want to talk through those as well. But any thoughts on the geography and the marketplace considerations?
Yes, just one simple thing, which is to your point, which I think is absolutely bang on. It used to be you versus your competitor. Now it's you versus your competitor and inflation. I would add into that as a separate thing, you versus your competitor versus very, in some cases, sharply dropping demand. And I think if the demographics mean that, everyone in Germany is retiring, which they are, and there are fewer young people in Europe as a whole, which is true. We're a very old continent compared to everywhere else, including America, apart from China. That means it used to be that Germany would be a great opportunity for an American or UK-based seller because people get freaked out by the fact that it's a different language. There are fewer US sellers. There are fewer Chinese sellers there than in the UK and the US. And really solid, wealthy consumers. So that was a great opportunity. I think going forward, sadly, I'm a German speaker. I love the country and the culture, but sadly, I think going forward, the consumer demand could crater based on the Ukraine war, depending what happens this coming autumn, depending when you listen to this. I mean, the demographics are a longer term trend. That could be basically a place that has been an amazing opportunity, could turn into basically a bit of a damp squib, whereas America will continue to be very competitive and get more competitive. But it may be the only place in the world left with really solid consumer demand, at least for a period.
What did you just
I
call
hope
it?
I'm
Was
wrong.
that a British colloquialism?
A damp squib, is that
what is
as
that?
in disappointing? I guess it's a bit like you light a firework and it kind of goes and then sort of fizzles out.
A dud. Okay, yeah, it's a dud. So, all right.
Britain will continue to export bizarre bits of language that Americans don't understand, but we may not have such good consumer consumption in the future.
Squib.
So look, I guess we're coming
Wait,
to
what's
the
a squib?
A squib.
What's a squib?
I think we may be going down a rabbit hole here. So let me bring let me bring us back.
Okay.
So apart from the diet macroeconomic picture, some people will be, as you were saying, in a better category than others to be protected, and some geographies and some marketplaces may be better than others. But what are other things we can actually do proactively about this, and particularly with pricing in mind as well?
Yeah, well, the second chapter in my pricing power book is Don't Start a War You Can't Win. And the basic thesis there is many sellers run to discounting as sort of a strategy, like, hey, 20% off sale, 50% off sale. And they do that sort of as a competitive challenge to who else is out there type thing. That is like normal. What we're in right now is like the bizarro universe anti-normal situation. And so honestly, one of the things that you might consider doing in this context is a reverse sale and telegraphing your reverse sales punches. And so let me describe what that would look like. So rather than saying, hey, we're going to do a 20% off sale starting on the 4th of July, you would do something more like this. Hey, our prices are all going up by 10% starting on the 4th of July to, because our costs have risen. Now, what that does is actually a very interesting psychological, kind of trigger in the mind of the consumer. Because if you think through the logic there, if I say to you, Michael, the new MacBook Air is going to be $2,000 starting July 4th, but right now it's $1,800. You're incentivized to go buy it today. It's very weird psychology because it produces the same response in the mind of the consumer as does a sale, but it's a reverse sale. Now, what happens to your daily sales rate after, July 4th? Well, that's what you've got to think through. But the reality is, in the inflationary rate we're in, I think doing the opposite, to quote, George Costanza from Seinfeld, might be the right approach, which is doing the opposite is the right thing, which is rather than having discounts, think about telegraphing your increasing prices going forward and being very transparent with your customers. Hey, we're so sorry, but our costs just went up by 8% this month alone, and we have to raise our prices starting, August 1st. And we're so sorry, but we're doing our very best to control pricing. And but we're going to have our $20 item will now be $21.50. That kind of approach, being transparent and honest about it, saying that not claiming victim status, but just being honest about the situation you're in, I think can be very endearing to customers, and you'll get points for truth. And you don't want to be the kind of salesperson like those furniture stores that are always going out of business every other month. Like somehow they always have a going out of business sale, but the store is still there like the next month. You're like, wait, I thought you went out of business. Oh, that was just a going out of business sale. We didn't really go out of business. You don't want to do stuff like that. That's like stupid shenanigans. But we're not in stupid shenanigan time. We're in, this is real. This is reality. Your costs are going up, and it probably does make sense to think through how to communicate that to your customers effectively.
This is brilliant thinking. I like it very much because it hits so many things in one go. I mean, for starters, the economic realities mean that you cannot afford to cut prices to gain
No.
sales unless you're
Yeah.
desperate for cash. And then, of course, that is a whole different problem. But also, I think, as I say to people so often, I love negotiations, which is a strange thing to say, but I just find that situation psychologically intriguing. And I think the truth is a great negotiating tool, as I say often, which isn't to say that should lie the rest of the time either. But I mean, I'm just, in fact, engineering things or acknowledging reality is fantastic. In this case, it's great positioning, as you say. You're not being a victim. Nice nuance to that as well. But being honest about the fact of what's changing. And the great thing is that every single person out there will immediately feel instinctively it's true, even if it
Yeah.
isn't, because
Yeah.
they are experiencing the same thing in their daily life. Their bread's
Sure.
got up 30p. Their I mean, in the UK, the gas, as you would call it, or petrol's got up, 50%, 60% in the last year. So
Yeah.
they're used to that idea. Okay, well, that's a fantastic thing. What other solutions have we got, particularly around sort of pricing area?
Well, I think just to play with that idea a little bit, you really can probably earn credibility points if you play on that strength and describe for your customers the way in which you're trying to be uh, the low cost provider for them, or the person who's battling for them the most. And maybe you even telegraph your punches. Hey, our costs include shipping and the product itself, and then the labor to put it together. Like, break down your business for your customers and say, look, we're trying to save money in the following 4 ways or 5 ways, but nonetheless, we still have to raise our prices by 3% or whatever it is. Those messages, I think you want to think through that and the copywriting associated, but it's also the business truth associated with it. It's just describing what's happening behind the scenes a little bit more than maybe we usually do. I think that will be helpful. I read one time in the book I always love is Price, the Myth of Fair Value by William Poundstone. I've always recommended that book to our podcast listeners. You're probably all sick of me mentioning it, but I think it's in that book that one of the research scientists have figured out that if you say to someone that you have to do something negative, they are much more agreeable to it if you just say because and give them literally any reason. And it's fascinating psychology, and I think it was from the Poundstone book. I might be misattributing that, but the idea holds, and it's basically the idea that if you just justify why you have to do something with a plausible reason, your customers will be much more open to it, and they'll, at least in their mind, say, "Oh, I understand. I understand what's happening. I might not like it. I might not be in agreement with it, but I like these people. I like their product, and they've told me why, the price is to go up." So I think those components are things to play with as you think about how to increase your prices. So I think that's first couple steps into how to manage this situation effectively.
Yeah, I like that very much. Giving reasons generally, I think there's Cialdini principle, saying the word because,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and
Okay.
then
Yeah.
giving anything really, which isn't to say
Okay.
that it
Yeah.
isn't true by Pouncing, because it's a bit more specific, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
I love your idea of being almost open about your costs, and then without, I guess, being so open that your competition reverse engineers what you're doing, but it may
Hmm.
be they can't do anything about it anyway,
Yeah.
and we're trying to save money in the following ways. That's brilliant messaging. And I think actually this reminds you of another thing that I think a meta lesson that I'm getting from a lot of this stuff is in difficult times you've got to do the things that in better times you should be doing anyway.
Hmm.
One of which
Hmm.
they say, people want to see how the sausage is made, quotes unquote. So I
Hmm.
think revealing how stuff is made, particularly if you've got an artisan type product or a
Hmm.
premium or sort of very, what's the word, something where the people are very enthusiastic about the
Yeah.
product type and they want to know about provenance. So that applies to certain kinds of cheese or whatever. My wife is
Hmm.
forever watching YouTube videos on how particular French cheeses are made, and without going over the top, you can even apply that to any product category, I think. And
It's
the
amazing.
more people have to pay for even
Yeah.
mundane daily items, kind of justifying that and letting people in on it instead of trying to, pull the wool in some way, fool them, I think is
Well,
really important.
you've touched on an important thing that I was thinking about as I was getting ready for this show, which is um, the idea of managing your brand as an upmarket brand or a downmarket brand is your choice. And so, just to describe it, if you're a premium provider in your niche, like you've got the highest price and you've got a brand reputation that affords you that ability, then in troubled times you have options, and one of the options you have is to become a middle priced seller, or even be the low price leader. You could do that. Now that's a one way slide. You can generally take your premier brand, your premium brand, down market and become a more price conscious, middle priced seller, or you can go to being a low price leader, and you'll have brand equity for a while, but you won't ever reinflate that balloon. It's a one way slide. And but you can do that. And in troubled times, if you did have a premium brand, um, and you're in trouble, then that's one of the cards you have on the table. And you can play with your pricing to that degree. That's a pretty dramatic step. But to your point, I mean, that is one of the things you get to manage is your positioning in the marketplace compared to your competitors. And it's something to think about as well.
Yeah, I like that one-way slide. It's a very important point. And to your point also about sales as opposed to sort of reverse sale, I think there's huge danger in, I guess we're sort of dancing around the other concept, which is that price is a positioning tool, right? Which I know is
Hmm.
more about your sort of puts
Right.
number three, really, which I
Hmm.
guess we're edging into. Maybe we should do that as well, because we
Yeah.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
can talk that one through. So I know from your book, Pricing Power, principle three is aligning pricing and marketing.
Yep.
So to that point, price is a positioning tool. And if you keep having discounts, for example, there's a store called DFS, which I've never been to in my life, but you cannot move on for TV ads, which I don't generally watch TV. Most of the time I go and see my parents or my father-in-law at Christmas or sort of Easter, things like that. And they are 100% discounted all the time, as far as I can gather. And what that tells me is it gives me the signal that there's not enough demand for their furniture to sell a chair at several £100s or whatever it is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it feels to me that if they ever tried to claw back to the higher ground of being genuinely premium, I just simply wouldn't believe them, and I don't think anyone else would.
No, but as a business operation, the best strategy in that regard is just to relaunch a new brand.
Okay.
They just create a new brand, and that
Well,
new brand you
can't
don't
hear you
know.
for some reason.
But
May have lost your ears. Okay, got you now.
oh, sorry, I lost my AirPods. Am I back?
You're
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
now.
I think I'm back. Yeah. So as a business operation, you just create a new brand, and the customer doesn't know that you're behind the premium brand, and is so much because it's obfuscated, and that premium brand then is out there, and you lean into that as the strategy for re-inflating the pricing strategy. So yeah, principle number 3 from the book is align marketing and pricing, and so we've touched on this. There are a lot of nuances there. So you all things being equal, the most premium brand in a market has the most margin because they have the highest price points. If you can obtain that level in your marketplace, then good for you. Don't cave on that, and hopefully you've got the brand power and you've got the business strength to endure a big recession and inflationary times, because there will always be buyers in a marketplace that don't care about price. And I know it sounds weird to go into a recession or in a time of extreme inflation, but there are buyers in every community who are like not they're just rich. They just have money. They just can afford whatever they want to buy, and it doesn't matter to them so much. They're more focused on the premier luxury brand product than the price they paid for it. It's a status symbol for them. It means more to them than just a sum of the dollars they spend on it. It means to them something emotionally, or something in their social group, or something in society. It's a statement piece. And those sellers that operate in that space and serve those customers, they are in the most favored position, all things being equal, if they can, maintain that reality. And so, that's the thing that you want to think through is, where are you now? If you're not in that position, and very few people are, then the question is, how can you create a context in which the value propositions do really well for you financially? In other words, selling items in a value context, or like as justifying a low cost, and so it's appealing to the masses but still makes you a margin that you can live on. Those are the challenges, and those are all marketing decisions. You're really talking about marketing, not pricing. Pricing is just the fork and knife, but what you're really working on is a big fat steak, which is the position in the market, right?
Yeah. But
So
still, you got to have the pricing. I think, yeah, pricing as positioning is incredibly important at the very, very highest end. So,
yeah.
by the way, I just had a quick Google. There are apparently, and I don't know how recent this data is, but 20.27 million millionaires in the USA, which is a substantial percentage of the population. So the number of people like that. I mean, okay, $1 million. You could argue if you live
Mhm.
in London, it doesn't feel like that much money, to be honest. I mean, I'd be happy to be handed $1 million, but it would
Yeah.
basically buy a flat that we've got already, I think, instead
Yeah.
of having a mortgage on it, and then we'd be
Yeah.
getting on with our lives as normal. So, but nevertheless, I mean, if you think there are, maybe, I don't know, a handful of deca millionaires, etc.,
Mhm.
there are a substantial number of people that I personally know in London, because I know some wealthy people here, that
Yeah.
who really it wouldn't make much difference to them about the recession, to
Yeah.
be honest, unless it happens to impact their corner of the world. So
Yeah,
you have a very good
that
point.
number 22 million, what would that be, like 8% or something like that of the US population? I heard
Something
a
along those
statistic
lines.
before that it was like 11%. So
Yeah,
let's just say between 8 and 10 or 11% of the
yeah,
population is a millionaire, which, to your point, what does that mean? But it's an indication of purchasing power, potentially, maybe.
yeah.
And so all that to say, there are people who will buy premium items. They'll certainly cut back in times of extreme recession, and many people who are in that category will fall out of it in times of
Mm.
extreme recession. But nonetheless, there are people who can afford to pay for premium items. Um, yeah,
So now you've got it in your pricing power book, which I've got on the principle 3, and you've got a great
yeah,
quote from Dan Kennedy, which I just want to read and get your thoughts on. So he says the best pricing strategy of all is creating visibly excess demand.
hmm
Um, so that obviously he's more been in the service industry marketing game, I guess, hasn't he? Had a lot of
yeah,
dentists at one point and
yeah.
what have you. Can we translate that to e-commerce? And do you think how do you think that plays out? Do you think that's the right way of putting it?
Man, the smartest marketers do. I think of Elon Musk and his Cybertruck. he's been teasing that thing for like 4 years or something. I forget how many people he had on his waiting list that had given $1,000 deposit or $100. I don't remember, but it was literally like, billions of dollars of future sales because he created a context in which there was visible excess over demand and under supply, and the waiting list was the way to do that. So that it is genius marketing, and Dan Kennedy has identified it from the olden days, pre-internet era, and people who are savvy marketers in the internet era can do similar things. Having a pre-buyer list. I mean, we got clients who could do this, who probably haven't done it enough. In fact, what you're reminding me is that maybe I'm taking a note for a few clients as I think about this. But any time in which you have product releases, containers coming in, product being made, it's ready, any time in which you have an actual date and time where you've got products that can be purchased, you've got an opportunity to create a pre-buyer list and to pre-sell or do deposits or have an early bird list. Those types of strategies, those are all designed to create demand ahead of inventory delivery. And that's the context in which powerful pricing opportunities exist, because you can say, look, this is coming down the road. If you want this price, get on this list. And you can say in the future, the price is going to go up, or supply will be gone. I mean, those are the two options. You can say, hey, and event marketers are very, very comfortable with this psychology. That's how you sell conferences or big events, is you say to them, there's 1,000 tickets. The early bird price is, $299. And if you wait past July 15th, they're going to go up in price, or they're all going to be gone. That's an event marketing tactic. You can do that same exact thing with physical products. I have a container of goods coming from China. It's taken me 7 months to get this. It's been ridiculous. It cost me 3 times more than I ever imagined I'd pay for shipping. I only have 3,200 units, and here's the price point. And they will either be gone, or I'm going to raise the price in the future to meet market demand and get your name on this list. And here's the link or whatever. All of those approaches ring true right now.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the shipping is a complete nightmare. So I think that's where the alignment of marketing, pricing, and marketing and pre-selling really come to play. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us as sellers right now.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, pre-selling is entirely possible on Amazon. In case you're an Amazon seller going, yeah, but Jason, no, that you don't have to have your own D2C site. Like, for example, I have pre-ordered Peter Zion's audiobook no, not the audiobook. I've listened to that. The physical book, I guess hardback, of The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which is a cheerful title. And you can imagine what it says about geopolitics and demographics. It's pretty
That's horrible.
apocalyptic, but it's an amazing book. I mean, I definitely recommend it. But the point is, because I'm a fan, and he's built a fan base and a following on Amazon, the platform that I know and love, or sometimes love, hate, but the main platform for the guys that I help, guess what? You can pre-sell on Amazon, and I've physically done it, and lots of people will if you're good at creating demand. So I love this opportunity. I really do.
I'll tell you, this is one of the ways in which digital goods sellers have a disadvantage over physical goods sellers. I mean, all things being equal, I'm usually like, digital goods, that's the way to go. But I realize most of our audience deals in physical goods, and this is a situation in which digital goods sellers just don't have this advantage. People know there's unlimited forever supply of any digital assets that's created. You can't say, for software or for how-to guides or for, video courses or something like that, there's only 42 copies left. You just can't do that. And but for physical stuff, you absolutely can. And on Shopify specifically, I will tell you that there are specific apps that you can rig up on your store that will, for example, give the stock units count right on the products page, right underneath the add to cart button, where so basically it can say like only 4 left in stock or 2 left in stock. We encourage our e-commerce customers, our clients, to install that app. And there's several to choose from, but they basically all do the same thing. And that's a really, really smart thing to do, because it helps clarify that sense of scarcity in juxtaposition to the current price.
Love that. And a couple of thoughts. I mean, obviously on Amazon, this happens automatically, but you can kind of engineer it by doing a
Yeah.
couple of things. Without being too tricksy, you can reserve stock. So you can put it on one side and say, this is not available for sale. So you could have 250 units in an FBA warehouse system spread all over the States or whichever country it is. And then if you've reserved, 210 units, you only have 40 left. So when it gets down to, the last 20 or so, they'll start telling people. So that could be a smart tactic as long as you don't overuse it. But the
Yeah.
other thing I would say, though, is the psychology of the sellers is very, very interesting to me, because most physical goods sellers, and this is an extraordinary testament to the amazing time we've been living through, which historically has never been this way. We've effectively been able to treat physical goods as almost as replaceable as digital goods, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And that
Yeah.
era, I don't think it's drawing
Done.
to a close. I think it's over. I think there's a sort of overhang psychologically that everyone in the world,
That's
including the
right.
consumers and the e-commerce sellers I know, think this is temporary. I don't think it is. But even if it's not temporary, it's going to be around for the next 18
That's
months,
right.
2 years. And what
Yeah.
that means is the reality is the physical goods are very limited and not easily replaceable. And therefore, each individual unit has a great deal of
Yeah.
pricing power if there is
Yeah.
demand for it. And to your
Yeah.
point, the different categories have different levels of demand and sensitivity to price. But I think people way underestimate this because their psychology is trained by, as a consumer and as a seller, a generation of plenty where nothing was really ever in short supply, and
And
it
this is,
suddenly changed.
yeah, this is sort of the situation where it's almost like which of the two bad options would you prefer as a buyer? And I'm thinking of the baby formula shortage right now in the US. It's really actually kind of like, I mean, it's alarming and sad and horrible. I mean, you hear these families that are like, please help me find this specific formula for my baby. Like, I can't find it anywhere. So the question is, as a consumer, which would you have rather had? Low prices until there's zero available, and then you have complete outage, or prices that ratcheted it up real high so that it was available to you, but you had to pay 4 times as much or 5 times as much. And that is on the horns of a dilemma that nobody wants to be on. But we're, as sellers, in the middle of that decision making, vector. Which of those two things do we do? And I would just say, I mean, there's real world implications. I mean, for baby formula, stuff like that. Um, it, I would imagine that if you're a new parent, you would have rather had supply available to you, even if you had to pay 2 or 3 times more, uh, you know, for it. And I don't know. I mean, but those are hard options. But I think we have to think through for our specific niches and for our customers that are looking for our products, which scenario which is least bad of
Yeah.
the bad options.
I guess
So.
that comes down to, I guess you introduced me to the phrase, I think it's price elasticity of demand, or
Hmm.
inelasticity.
Hmm.
So in other words,
Hmm.
so petrol, i.e. gasoline, has gone up
Yeah.
50% in the UK in the last few months, probably a little bit more. I got rid of my car about 3 years ago, partly because of things like that, and partly because we live in central London and it was pleasureless driving and we have public transport. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things there, if you have to drive to work because public transport's more
Hmm.
expensive or not available, you will probably keep buying petrol or gas at that kind of price. There's
Yeah.
probably a level where it just basically causes a massive recession. I believe that there's a certain, I think sort of a $10 or $20 raise in the oil price correlates to 1% reduction in GDP globally, or I can't
Yeah.
remember the exact numbers, but there is a correlation, but it's very, very gradual. It's not very specific to individual sales. Whereas
Yeah.
baby milk might be another thing, or baby formula, whereas there'll be other things to the point of the discretionary level, where people just go, well, I'm not going to buy that sort of luxury level handbag, for example,
Yeah.
but I might buy myself a substitute, a sort of luxury substitute, which I think is another positioning where on Amazon anyway, just generally not premium, but sort of affordable premium, if that's a
Hmm.
thing,
Hmm.
is a positioning that's always been quite, how can I put it, quite native to Amazon as a platform.
Hmm.
It's not like there
Hmm.
aren't wealthy people buying a lot
Right.
of expensive products, but it tends towards that. And I think that's not a bad place to go, in my opinion. I mean, how do you look through this sort of lens of elasticity of demand? What do you come up with as solutions there?
Yeah. So the concept is, if prices increase radically, does demand drop off or does it stay the same? And there are some things like what a fuel could be an example, but some of this stuff's not discretionary. You just have to buy it at any price point. And so, yeah, I to your point about the price positioning on Amazon, I also think of Target as an interesting case in point. My wife and daughters love Target. They're addicted to Target, and I didn't really understand it. But then I really started to ask them, well, what's the pricing, and what is this stuff? What's it compared to? And basically, the pricing strategy for Target is they have designs that are similar to high-end designs, but they've manufactured them at a low price, cost-wise, so that they're basically nice designs at sort of an affordable price point. To your point, how you describe it, and I think Amazon is good for that as well. And so, if you can play in that space as an e-commerce operator, you're wise to do it. Um, Target assembled that system by buying brands and by building brands internally. And Smith and Hawken is the brand I always loved in the gardening space. They bought that company, and it had a prestige brand concept, and then they made it sort of just a shelf brand. And so you have to decide as a seller, can you create the feeling of a higher end brand? You do that through your photography, through your website, through your copywriting, through your videography, through your social media, the look and feel of the packaging. And can you deliver it for a good, a fair price and still make margin? These are the struggles. I mean, all of those components, the work for videography, the work for photography, the work for copywriting, the cost of the packaging for your product, all of those things are inflating radically. And so, can you even build a system like that? That's the challenge. And so I think those are the hard decisions for sellers. So
I guess again, this is a sort of nice to have in good times and a must have in bad times. I would say all the things you were saying about creating the feel of a high end brand, but with affordable quality, affordable products, is something that all Amazon sellers I know really have been, the successful ones have been playing in that pool. I would say
yeah.
it comes down to some harder choices possibly, and maybe you do fewer product lines, or you expand more slowly, or you stop expanding product lines and just focus on what works. But I would always say there's a sort of upfront investment or sort of overhead type cost with photography, copywriting, videography, packaging, development, which can be considerable, but none of that except for the packaging hits the direct cost. So each sale is incrementally
Yeah.
more profitable.
Right.
And I'm always a big fan of particularly of marketing assets. And on Amazon, it comes down to the product detail page optimization. It's a fairly simple but brutal fight, which has its nuances. Obviously, for Shopify, you've got a broader canvas to work on. But marketing assets they're not one and done, but they're kind of one-off in the sense that you maybe you've got to update more and more on someone like Shopify. But for an Amazon listing, you could update it once a season and get away with it as long as you've adjusted for the new economic situation. And so I think paying once and getting paid multiple times is always a smart investment, is what I'm trying to say, rather than focusing too much on the direct cost, which is always a fight every single time you make a sale.
And sometimes in a recessionary period, you can actually lean into the low cost brand as a strategy. When I grew up as a kid, we would go to the grocery store called Lucky's, and they had a whole aisle of generic items that were all in a yellow box. You wouldn't want to be caught dead as a fifth grader or sixth grader in school having yellow box food, because it was almost like government food. I mean, it was like the cheap stuff. It's like government cheese is a famous thing in America. It's like that's what the poor people got. But if you're in a recession and you're selling on Amazon, you can certainly lean into that as a strategy. Yellow box is a strategy. You can, for example, have a brown paper bag with a sticker on it and say, this is the cheapest version of this you're going to find on Amazon, because we're not spending any money on packaging. And if the customer believes that argument and they like that and they think, okay, this is a credible product, these guys are trying to be as cheap as possible, you might win sales with that approach. So that's, again, principle 3 in the book: aligning marketing and pricing. And there's a lot of creative opportunity there to really think through how to appeal to the mind and the psychology of the customer.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. Part of me is sort of reacting at a fear level, almost thinking, oh my goodness, the Chinese suppliers will always be cheaper. But that has been true for the last generation, really, or increasingly the last 10 years. But actually, with the COVID lockdowns, and then goodness knows what else happens, like the oil price rising, which will hugely impact China because it imports everything in huge amounts, including oil. then there may be a tipping point where actually, particularly American producers could become the low cost, high value, good value sort of bargain,
Yeah.
lower pricing point. And that time may be approaching. I've got a feeling that it's a bit early for making that work in terms of profit at the moment, but who knows? I mean, it depends on the category you're selling, of course, as well, like baby milk.
So let me summarize, because we've got a hard stop here in a moment, but let me summarize this way. In a recessionary time and in high inflation time, your pricing strategy is the most central thing you can think through in terms of managing your success going forward. Consider a reverse sale. Consider repositioning your brand and your product lines. Consider how your marketing aligns to your pricing, and how to be creative in storytelling and customer conversations about how best to be honest about what you have to do, which is likely raise prices. And in those ways, you can stay ahead of the curve here. Look for opportunities to acquire your competitors as they maybe go under, and grow your brand and grow your overall leadership in your niche, even during a recessionary time. So hopefully that's a decent summary of the conversation. And Michael, as always, it's an honor to hang out with you. I'll just suggest that people check out our call-in show on the call-in app, and then also on Spotify, where we tend to be rising every month, which is really exciting. If on any podcast player you're listening to us, we'd love your highest and best review and comment about the quality of the show from your point of view would be incredibly helpful as well. So, Michael, appreciate the conversation, man.
Jason, likewise. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yep. Talk soon.